where we share tales of women who discover that some bloodlines carry more than just DNA and that disrespecting the wrong mother can awaken powers that have slept for generations. If you've ever been humiliated by family, if you've ever felt powerless in the face of cruelty, this story will remind you that some women come from lines that never learn to bow. Don't just listen and leave. Hit subscribe so you'll never miss another story that speaks to your soul. Ring that notification bell because today's story about Alara Blackthorn will show you that when you come from a family of spiritual protectors, revenge isn't just personal, it's ancestral. Let's begin. My name is Alara Blackthorn, and at 62 years old, I should have known better than to expect basic human decency from my son's wife. But standing in their gleaming modern kitchen that Thanksgiving evening, watching Madison serve everyone else from beautiful platters while shoving cold, congealed leftovers onto a paper plate for me, I realized that some lessons can only be learned through humiliation. "Here you go, Alara," Madison said with that saccharine smile she'd perfected over the past 5 years since marrying my son. "That's all you deserve, right? I mean, do you even eat better than this in your little house?" The words hung in the air like poison, and for a moment, the entire dining room fell silent. My 8-year-old granddaughter Emma looked between her mother and me with confused, troubled eyes. The other guests, Madison's parents, her sister's family, even some neighbors she'd invited to pad the numbers, shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. But it was my son Marcus's reaction that cut deepest. Instead of defending me, instead of standing up for the woman who had raised him alone after his father died when he was 12, he laughed. A short, nervous chuckle that told me everything I needed to know about the man he'd become. "Mom's always been low maintenance," he said, not meeting my eyes. "She doesn't need all the fancy stuff, right, Mom?" I looked down at the paper plate, holding the scraped-together remnants of what had clearly been a magnificent meal. Cold, dried turkey. Congealed gravy with a skin forming on top. Green bean casserole that had been picked through, leaving only the soggy onions. Cranberry sauce that was more gel than fruit. Meanwhile, everyone else ate from Madison's grandmother's china, enjoying perfectly prepared dishes served on real plates with actual silverware. The contrast was deliberate, calculated, and designed to show me exactly where I ranked in this family's hierarchy. I had driven 3 hours to be here. I had brought gifts for everyone, including the expensive cashmere scarf that Madison was currently wearing. I had helped Marcus through college, through his early career struggles, through the down payment on this very house where I was now being treated like an unwelcome charity case. But none of that mattered to the woman who had somehow convinced my son that I was an embarrassment to be managed rather than a mother to be honored. I set down my plastic fork and looked directly at Madison for the first time all evening. Really looked at her, with the kind of focused attention that my grandmother had taught me to use when I needed to see beyond the surface of things. Madison's aura was exactly what I'd expected, muddy browns and sickly yellows, the colors of selfishness and cruelty. But there was something else there too, something that made my breath catch. A smugness, a satisfaction that told me this humiliation had been planned, not spontaneous. "Thank you for dinner, Madison," I said, my voice perfectly calm despite the rage building in my chest. "I hope you got exactly what you wanted from this evening." I stood up slowly, feeling the familiar tingle that my grandmother had called the awakening, the moment when centuries of inherited power began stirring in response to injustice. "I'll see myself out," I said. As I gathered my coat and purse, I heard Madison's voice carrying from the dining room, bright and brittle. "Well, that was dramatic. More wine, everyone." But I also heard the undertone of nervous laughter from her guests, the forced quality that suggested not everyone was entirely comfortable with what they'd witnessed. The drive home took 3 hours through the darkness of rural Connecticut roads. 3 hours to think about the look on Marcus's face when he'd laughed at his wife's cruelty. 3 hours to remember every sacrifice I'd made for that ungrateful boy. 3 hours for the old anger to build. The kind of righteous fury that my grandmother had warned me about, the emotion that could awaken powers that had slept for generations. When I arrived home, I didn't go inside immediately. Instead, I sat in my car, staring at the house that had sheltered 7 generations of Blackthorn women and made a decision that would change everything. I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app that managed the trust fund Robert had established for Marcus and Emma. As the account holder and primary trustee, I had full control over the funds, something Marcus had forgotten in his eagerness to humiliate me alongside his wife. With a few taps, I froze every account. The college fund for Emma. The emergency fund Marcus relied on for unexpected expenses. The investment account that was supposed to fund their upcoming kitchen renovation. All of it, locked down until further notice. Then I went inside to the basement, to the room that had been the heart of my family's practice for 7 generations. It was time to remind my son's family that some bloodlines carried responsibilities as well as privileges, and that disrespecting a Blackthorn woman had consequences they couldn't imagine. The curse would begin at dawn. I woke before sunrise, not from an alarm, but from the pull of forces that had been dormant in my blood for too long. The basement ritual room still hummed with residual energy from the night before, and I could feel the first tendrils of the working beginning to take hold. My phone had 17 missed calls from Marcus. I smiled as I deleted them all without listening. The landline rang as I was making my morning tea. Marcus's name appeared on the caller ID, and this time I answered on the first ring. Mom, what the hell is going on? All our accounts are frozen. The bank says you've put some kind of hold on everything. Good morning to you too, Marcus. This isn't funny. Madison's trying to buy groceries, and her card was declined. I try to get gas on the way to work, and my account is showing 0 available funds. What did you do? I exercised my legal rights as trustee of your father's estate. Did you forget that Robert left me in control of those funds specifically to ensure they were used responsibly? But you can't just freeze everything. We have bills, expenses, Emma needs. Emma needs to see her father stand up for her grandmother instead of laughing when his wife humiliates her. Until that happens, the funds remain frozen. Mom, please. Madison didn't mean anything by last night. She was just stressed about hosting and... Don't. The word came out sharper than I'd intended, carrying an undertone that made Marcus fall silent immediately. Do not call me to make excuses for your wife's deliberate cruelty. Okay, yes, she was out of line. But freezing our accounts? That's extreme. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like a perfectly reasonable response to being treated like garbage by people who've forgotten that their comfortable lifestyle depends on my continued generosity. I could hear Madison's voice in the background, shrill and demanding explanations that Marcus clearly couldn't provide. What do you want? He asked finally. What will it take to unfreeze the accounts? A genuine apology. From both of you. Not because you want access to your trust fund, but because you understand that what happened last night was unacceptable.
Fine. I'm sorry.
I should have. Not to me, Marcus. To the woman you used to be before your wife convinced you that humiliating your mother was acceptable behavior. The line went quiet for a long moment. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was smaller, more uncertain. I don't understand what you mean. Then you have some thinking to do. The accounts will remain frozen until you figure it out. I hung up before he could respond, then walked to my study where the scrying mirror waited. When I touched its obsidian surface and spoke Madison's name, images began to form in its depths. Madison was in their kitchen, surrounded by spoiled groceries and malfunctioning appliances. Every piece of technology in their house had begun failing in small but persistent ways, the Wi-Fi cutting out randomly, the smart home system flickering on and off, even their expensive coffee machine producing nothing but bitter, undrinkable sludge. But more importantly, I could see the first physical signs that the deeper magic was beginning to work. Madison stood in front of their bathroom mirror, examining something on her neck. At first it looked like a shadow, but as I watched, it became more distinct, a dark mark just below her left ear, shaped like a handprint. She touched it gingerly, clearly confused. It wasn't painful yet, but it was undeniably there, and it was growing darker by the hour. The mark of a mother's curse. The first sign that ancient justice had been awakened. My phone rang again around noon. This time it was Madison calling from her work phone since their home lines had mysteriously stopped functioning. "Ilara, we need to talk. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding about last night." "Has there?" "Of course. I would never deliberately try to hurt your feelings. If you somehow interpreted my actions as disrespectful, then I'm sorry you feel that way." Not an apology, a manipulation. Exactly what I'd expected. "Madison, have you looked in a mirror today?" There was a pause. "What kind of question is that?" "Just wondering if you've noticed anything unusual." "I don't know what you're talking about," but her voice suggested otherwise. I could hear the barely controlled fear, the growing awareness that something was wrong in ways she couldn't explain. "How are things at home? Everything working properly?" "Actually, we've been having some technical issues. Electronics, appliances, even our cars are acting up. It's probably just coincidence, but Marcus mentioned you were talking about family folklore last night. Were you expecting me to make this easy for you, Madison? To just accept your cruelty and move on like a good little victim?" "I don't understand what." "You served me garbage on a paper plate while everyone else ate from China. You did it deliberately, in front of a room full of people, to humiliate me. And my son laughed." "Ilara, you're overreacting to what was just a busy evening with limited resources. I'm responding proportionately to a calculated act of cruelty. And Madison, this is just the beginning." I hung up and returned to the scrying mirror to observe the next phase unfolding. The mark on Madison's neck was spreading, and her reflection in mirrors had begun showing subtle distortions, a delay in movement, expressions that didn't quite match her actual face. By evening, their house had become a chaos of malfunctioning technology and spoiled food. But the real test would come when they tried to sleep, when the deeper magic could work on Madison's subconscious mind and show her exactly what kind of person she was becoming. The curse was building momentum, following patterns established by generations of Blackthorn women who had faced their own moments of profound disrespect. Each phase would be worse than the last, escalating until Madison found genuine remorse or lost her humanity entirely. I spent the evening in my library, reviewing the family grimoire to ensure I understood every nuance of what I'd set in motion. The curse would give Madison multiple opportunities to choose redemption over destruction, but it would also ensure that the consequences grew more severe each time she chose pride over accountability. Tomorrow would bring the second phase, and I doubted Madison was prepared for what that would entail. By Friday morning, Madison's world was unraveling in ways that couldn't be explained by mere coincidence. Through the scrying mirror, I watched her stand in their kitchen, surrounded by evidence of forces beyond her understanding. Every piece of food in their refrigerator had spoiled overnight, covered in mold that seemed to writhe with unnatural life. But worse than that, the food kept spoiling even after she replaced it. Fresh groceries turned rotten within hours of entering the house. Their smart home system had developed a malicious intelligence of its own. Lights flickered in patterns that spelled out words when viewed from the right angle. The thermostat created temperature zones that formed the shape of accusatory pointing fingers. The security system triggered alarms that played recordings of laughter. Marcus's laughter from Thanksgiving night looped endlessly until Madison fled the house in tears. But the most disturbing change was in Madison herself. The mark on her neck had grown into a network of dark veins that crept up toward her face and down beneath her collarbone. Her skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and her reflection now lagged several seconds behind her actual movements. I was documenting these changes when Marcus called again, his voice cracking with panic. "Mom, something's really wrong. Madison's sick, and our house is— I don't know how to describe it, but everything's falling apart." "What do you mean, sick?" "She's got these marks on her skin that doctors can't explain. Her blood work comes back normal, but she looks like she's dying. And the house— Mom, I think it might actually be cursed." "Cursed? That's a very old-fashioned way of thinking, Marcus. Don't play games with me. Food spoils instantly, electronics malfunction in impossible ways, and there are voices coming from empty rooms. This morning I heard Dad's voice telling me to be a better son to my mother." I paused, genuinely surprised. "You heard your father?" "Clear as day. He was disappointed in me. Said he was ashamed of the man I'd become." Marcus was crying now. "Mom, I know you're doing this somehow. The stories Grandma used to tell about our family, about abilities that got passed down through the bloodline, they were true, weren't they?" "What do you think, Marcus?" "I think I let my wife humiliate my mother, and now my mother is using supernatural powers to destroy my family. And how does that make you feel?" "Terrified, but also ashamed, because I know I deserve it." It was the first genuine emotion I'd heard from him since Thanksgiving. Not fear for the consequences, but actual understanding of what he'd done wrong. "Marcus, the curse isn't about punishment. It's about justice. Your wife deliberately hurt someone who had never done her any harm, and you enabled that cruelty. The universe is simply restoring balance. By destroying Madison, by giving her the opportunity to choose redemption over pride. Every day she refuses to take responsibility for her actions, the corruption spreads deeper. Eventually, it will consume everything that makes her human. And if she does apologize, if she genuinely makes amends, then the curse ends, and she gets to keep her soul. But Marcus, it has to be real remorse, not just fear-motivated performance. The magic can tell the difference. What if it's too late? What if she's already too far gone to find genuine remorse? I looked at the scrying mirror, where Madison was cowering in her bathroom as her reflection moved independently, mouthing words that her physical form wasn't speaking. Then she becomes something that looks like Madison, but isn't her anymore. Something that exists only to spread the same kind of cruelty that awakened the curse in the first place.
Jesus Christ.
Mom, even if she deserves this, what about Emma? What about me? The curse will spread to anyone who enables Madison's cruelty or benefits from it. Right now, that's just your immediate household. But if it progresses to the final phase, what happens in the final phase? It becomes contagious. Anyone Madison interacts with becomes infected with the same spiritual corruption. Co-workers, neighbors, strangers at the grocery store, all of them would begin exhibiting the same cruel, selfish behavior that triggered the curse originally. Marcus was quiet for a long time. How do we stop it? Madison has to come to my house and face what she's done. She has to acknowledge her cruelty, understand why it was wrong, and commit to being a better person. Not because she's scared of the consequences, but because she's genuinely horrified by who she became. And if she refuses, then by next weekend, everyone in your town will be marked. By the end of the month, the spiritual contagion will have spread across half of Connecticut. You're talking about destroying thousands of innocent people. I'm explaining what will happen if your wife continues to choose pride over accountability. The curse doesn't care about innocence, Marcus. It cares about justice. And it will keep spreading until that justice is achieved. So Madison comes to your house and apologizes, or we watch our entire world burn down around us. Those are the choices, yes. That evening, Madison called me directly for the first time since the curse began. Her voice was distorted by harmonics that suggested she was no longer entirely human. "What do you want from me?" she asked without preamble. "I think you know what I want. You want me to grovel, to debase myself and beg for forgiveness for some imagined slight. I want you to take responsibility for deliberately humiliating someone who had never done you any harm. And if I refuse?" I looked at the scrying mirror, where Madison's reflection was now acting completely independently, turning to look directly at me with eyes that burned with inhuman intelligence. "Then you'll discover what happens when someone from my bloodline decides you're beyond redemption. I'm not afraid of you, old woman. Whatever tricks you're using, whatever psychological games you're playing, I won't be manipulated into admitting fault for actions that were completely justified." The thing looking back at me from the mirror wasn't Madison anymore. Or rather, it was Madison without any restraining influence from conscience or empathy. It was what she would become if the curse progressed to its final form. "In that case," I said quietly, "I'll see you soon. Whether you come willingly or the curse compels you to face judgment, you'll be standing in my house before the week is over." "And then what?" "Then we'll discover whether there's enough humanity left in you to save, or whether you've chosen to become something that needs to be contained for the safety of everyone around you." The call ended with a sound like breaking glass, and I knew that Madison had made her choice. She would come to my house, but not to seek forgiveness. She would come to fight, empowered by entities that fed on cruelty and motivated by pride that had been twisted into something monstrous. The final confrontation was approaching, and for the first time since awakening the curse, I wasn't certain I would be strong enough to contain what Madison was becoming. But ready or not, the reckoning was coming. By Sunday evening, I could sense through the scrying mirror that Madison had passed the point where genuine human remorse was possible. The spiritual corruption had progressed too far, consuming the parts of her consciousness that might have chosen redemption over destruction. But something else had happened that I hadn't anticipated, something that filled me with both hope and dread. Marcus had taken Emma to stay with his friend's family across town, removing her from the house before the curse could spread to an innocent child. More importantly, he had started researching our family history, digging through old documents and journals that I'd forgotten he had access to. He called me that evening with a discovery that changed everything. "Mom, I found Grandma's diary from 1987, the one she wrote during the Henderson incident." I felt my blood run cold. The Henderson incident was family legend. The last time a Blackthorn woman had been forced to use the binding ritual to contain a curse that had progressed beyond redemption. "Marcus, those journals are private family records. You shouldn't." I had to understand what we're dealing with. "Mom, Grandma wrote about someone named Patricia Henderson who was corrupted by entities that fed on family cruelty. She became something inhuman, something that had to be contained." "What did you learn?" "That the binding ritual doesn't just stop the curse. It transforms the corrupted person into a guardian spirit that protects against similar incursions. Patricia Henderson became part of the protective network that keeps this region safe from spiritual predators." "Marcus, why are you telling me this?" "Because I think Madison is past the point where she can choose redemption on her own. But maybe she could choose to become something that protects Emma and other children from the kind of spiritual corruption that's consuming her." It was a possibility I'd considered, but dismissed as too dangerous. The binding ritual was incredibly complex and carried enormous risks for everyone involved. If it went wrong, instead of creating a protective guardian, it could unleash something even worse than a corrupted human. That ritual hasn't been performed in over 30 years. I'm not even sure I remember all the components. Grandma's diary has detailed notes. And Mom, I think Madison might actually want this option. The part of her that's still human is horrified by what she's becoming. if we could offer her a way to transform her corruption into protection. It would mean giving up her humanity permanently. She'd exist as a spiritual guardian, but never again as a person who could live, love, or have normal relationships. But she'd be choosing to protect others instead of harm them. And maybe that choice, that final act of selflessness, would count as the genuine remorse the curse is looking for. I spent the night reviewing my grandmother's notes about the Henderson binding. The ritual was indeed complex, requiring not just the corrupted person's consent but active participation from family members who loved them despite their corruption. More concerning was the requirement that the binding be performed willingly by the corrupted person at the moment when they fully understood what they were giving up. It couldn't be forced or coerced. It had to be a genuine choice to sacrifice personal happiness for the protection of others. By Monday morning, I had made my decision. I called Marcus with instructions. Bring Madison to my house tonight at sundown. Just the two of you. Emma needs to stay safely away from this. And Marcus. Make sure Madison understands that this is her last chance to end the curse peacefully. What if she refuses? What if she's too far gone to make rational choices? Then I'll be forced to use the containment ritual instead of the binding ritual. And that would be something none of us would want to live with. What's the difference? Binding transforms corruption into protection. Containment simply locks the corruption away where it can't spread. Madison would still exist, but trapped in a form that could never again interact with the living world. And if we do nothing, by Wednesday, the curse will have progressed to the point where it becomes permanently contagious. Anyone Madison has touched, even briefly, will begin showing symptoms of the same spiritual corruption. Within a month, we could be looking at a regional epidemic of supernatural cruelty. That evening, as I prepared the basement ritual space for what might be the most important working of my life, I reflected on the strange turns this situation had taken. What had begun as a simple desire for justice had evolved into something that could determine the spiritual safety of our entire region. Madison had chosen cruelty over kindness, and that choice had awakened forces that demanded either redemption or containment. But now she had a third option: transformation into something that could protect others from making the same destructive choices she had made. The question was whether any part of the woman she'd once been still existed to make that choice, or whether the entities corrupting her consciousness would fight to prevent such a profound act of selflessness. As sundown approached, I could feel the weight of generations of Blackthorn women watching from beyond the veil, waiting to see whether I would prove worthy of the power they had passed down to me. The final confrontation was about to begin, and this time, the stakes weren't just one woman's soul or one family's happiness. This time, the fate of everyone Madison might ever touch hung in the balance. At exactly sundown, I heard a car in my driveway. Through the front window, I watched Marcus half-carry, half-drag Madison up my front walk. She was fighting him every step of the way, but not with normal human resistance. Her movements were too fluid, too predatory, like a wild animal being forced into captivity. The dark marks now covered most of her visible skin in intricate patterns that seemed to shift when observed directly. Her eyes had taken on a yellowish cast, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that no human throat should be able to produce. But most disturbing was her smile, cold and predatory in ways that Madison's face had never been designed to manage. "I don't want to go in there," she shrieked as Marcus pulled her toward my front door. "She can't make me apologize for anything." I opened the door before Marcus could knock, and Madison's transformed gaze met mine directly for the first time since the curse began. What looked back at me was no longer entirely human. The curse had been accelerated by her refusal to feel genuine remorse, and spiritual entities had used that corruption as an opening to begin replacing her consciousness with something alien. "Hello, Madison," I said calmly. "I'm glad you could make it." Her response was a sound that was part scream, part hiss, and part something else entirely, the sound of a soul being consumed by forces it had invited but couldn't control. The moment she crossed my threshold, every candle in the house flickered simultaneously, and the temperature dropped by at least 10 degrees. "Jesus," Marcus whispered, pulling his jacket tighter. "Mom, what is this place?" He was feeling the accumulated power of 7 generations of Blackthorn women, the spiritual weight of centuries spent protecting this region from supernatural threats. But Madison's reaction was far more dramatic. She doubled over as if in physical pain, the dark marks on her skin beginning to glow with sickly yellow light. "It burns," she gasped, her voice distorted by entities that were reacting to the protective energies of my home. "Make it stop burning. The burning is what's left of your conscience trying to reassert itself," I explained, guiding them toward the basement door. "It's what happens when genuine remorse tries to surface despite the corruption consuming you." "I have nothing to be remorseful about." Madison straightened up, her inhuman eyes blazing with borrowed power. "I treated you exactly as you deserve to be treated." Marcus started to object, but I held up a hand to stop him. "Let her talk, Marcus. I want to hear everything she has to say." As we descended into the basement ritual space, Madison began a monologue that revealed the full extent of her spiritual corruption. "You want to know what really happened at Thanksgiving? I planned every detail. The plate, the leftovers, the public humiliation. All of it was designed to show you exactly what you are, a pathetic old woman who thinks she deserves respect she hasn't earned." The basement had been prepared for either binding or containment, with protective circles drawn in salt and silver, candles arranged according to patterns my ancestors had used for the most dangerous workings. "And Marcus's laughter?" I asked, continuing to move around the ritual space while Madison ranted. "The sweetest sound I'd ever heard. Proof that he finally understood who he really belonged to. Proof that I'd won the competition you were too stupid to realize you were in." "And how do you feel about that victory now?" Madison's smile grew wider, revealing teeth that seemed sharper than they should be.
Proud.
Satisfied. Like I finally put you in your place after years of watching Marcus treat you like you were something special. Marcus was staring at his wife with growing horror, finally seeing the full extent of what she had become. "Madison, please. This isn't you talking." "Oh, but it is me, darling. It's who I've always been underneath the polite facade. Your precious mother just gave me permission to stop pretending to be nice." I completed the protective circle and turned to face her directly. "Madison, I'm going to offer you 3 choices. The first is genuine remorse, acknowledging what you did wrong and committing to change. But I can see that's no longer possible for you." "Damn right it's not possible. I have nothing to apologize for." The second choice is the binding ritual. You accept transformation into a guardian spirit that protects others from the kind of corruption that's consuming you. You give up your humanity, but you choose to become something that serves others instead of something that destroys them. Madison's expression flickered for just a moment, and I saw something that might have been the real woman beneath the corruption. "What's the third choice?" Marcus asked quietly. "Containment. Madison gets trapped in a form that can hold the corruption without spreading it, but she remains conscious and aware of what she's lost forever. And if she chooses none of those options, then the curse progresses to its final phase, and everyone she's ever interacted with becomes infected with the same spiritual corruption that's consuming her now." I could see Madison struggling with something, fighting against influences that wanted her to choose destruction over any form of limitation. "The binding ritual," she said suddenly, her voice briefly returning to something recognizably human. "Tell me more about the binding ritual." "You would become a protective spirit anchored to this region. You'd retain your consciousness and memories, but you'd exist to guard against the kind of supernatural predators that tried to consume you. It would be meaningful work, but you'd never again be able to touch, to love, to have normal relationships with the living. I would protect Emma? The question came out in Madison's real voice, free from the supernatural distortions.
Yes.
You would protect Emma and hundreds of other children from ever facing what you're going through now. Madison's body convulsed as human consciousness fought against the entities possessing her. The yellow light from her marks flickered, and for a moment she looked almost like herself again. I can feel them, she whispered. The things inside me. They're showing me what will happen if I choose the binding. They say I'll be trapped forever, unable to return to my family. That's true. But you'll also be choosing to become something that protects instead of destroys. Something that ensures other families don't go through what yours has endured. And if I refuse? I gestured toward the scrying mirror, which was reflecting images of the future. Madison's co-workers developing the same cruel expressions, children in her neighborhood beginning to exhibit supernatural aggression, the spiritual contagion spreading like wildfire through the community. Then in 3 days, everyone you've touched will begin showing symptoms of the same corruption. In a week, it will spread to their families. In a month, half of Connecticut will be infected with supernatural cruelty that feeds on itself and grows stronger. Madison stared at the images, and I could see the last vestiges of her humanity warring against the entities that wanted to use her as a vector for spiritual plague. I don't want that, she said quietly. I never wanted to hurt innocent people. Then choose the binding. Choose to transform your corruption into protection. The entities possessing her shrieked as she began to nod, their hold on her consciousness weakening as she made the choice to sacrifice herself for others. I choose the binding, Madison said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. I choose to become something that protects children like Emma from what I became. The ritual that followed was unlike anything I'd ever attempted. It required Madison's active participation as she consciously chose to give up her humanity in service of protecting others. Marcus had to speak words of love and forgiveness, accepting that the woman he'd married would continue to exist, but in a form that could never again be his wife. As the transformation began, the dark marks on Madison's skin began to change from symbols of corruption into patterns of protection. Her physical form became translucent, then gradually faded until only her consciousness remained, anchored to the protective network that surrounded our region. I can see everything, her voice whispered from the air around us. All the places where dark entities try to enter our world. All the people who are vulnerable to the kind of corruption that almost consumed me. And you're willing to guard against those threats. For as long as necessary. For as long as children like Emma need protection. Marcus was weeping openly, mourning the loss of his wife, while celebrating her choice to become something that would protect their daughter. Can I still talk to her? He asked. Occasionally. But Marcus, you need to understand that she's no longer Madison in any conventional sense. She's become something larger, something dedicated to protecting others. You'll need to let her go and rebuild your life. I understand. And, Madison, I'm proud of you for the choice you made, for becoming someone who protects instead of destroys. Take care of Emma, Madison's voice replied. Help her understand that sometimes the people we love make choices that take them away from us, but that doesn't mean the love disappears. As the ritual concluded and Madison's consciousness integrated fully into the protective network, I felt a profound sense of completion. The curse had achieved its purpose, not just justice for the original cruelty, but transformation of that cruelty into something that would protect countless innocent people. What happens now? Marcus asked as we climbed the stairs from the basement. Now you go home and explain to Emma that her mother made a very brave choice to become a guardian angel for children who might face spiritual dangers. And you learn to be both father and mother to a little girl who will need extra love to process this loss. And the trust fund? will be unfrozen tomorrow morning. But Marcus, I want you to understand something. The money was never the point. The point was teaching you and Madison that some things, respect, human dignity, basic kindness, matter more than social status or material comfort. I understand. And Mom,
I'm sorry.
for laughing, for not defending you, for letting my wife treat you like you were worthless. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be the son you deserve to have. You already are that son, Marcus. The fact that you helped Madison make the right choice, even knowing it would cost you your marriage, proves that you've learned what really matters. As Marcus drove away to begin the difficult task of explaining to Emma why her mother wouldn't be coming home, I sat in my garden and reflected on the strange journey we'd all taken. Madison had begun as a cruel woman who took pleasure in humiliating others. The curse had offered her multiple opportunities to choose remorse over pride, redemption over destruction. When those opportunities were refused, it had escalated to the point where her humanity was being consumed by entities that fed on cruelty. But in the end, when faced with the choice between becoming a source of spiritual plague or sacrificing herself to protect others, Madison had found the strength to choose protection over destruction. The curse was complete, but its effects would ripple forward for generations, not as a source of ongoing harm, but as a guardian presence that would keep children like Emma safe from the kind of supernatural predators that preyed on family dysfunction. Sometimes the most powerful magic wasn't about punishment or reward. Sometimes it was about transformation, taking the worst aspects of human nature and alchemizing them into something that served the greater good. Madison was gone, but what she had chosen to become would protect thousands of innocent people from ever experiencing the kind of spiritual corruption that had nearly destroyed her. The mother's curse had found its resolution in the most unexpected way possible, through an act of ultimate maternal sacrifice. 3 weeks after Madison's transformation, I began to understand the full scope of what we'd accomplished. The spiritual landscape across New England was changing in ways that hadn't been seen for generations. Through the scrying mirror, I could observe Madison's work as a guardian spirit. She was everywhere and nowhere, a protective presence that manifested wherever children were vulnerable to supernatural predation. I watched her intervention in a dozen different situations, stopping spiritual attachments before they could take hold, guiding threatened children to safety, even alerting other practitioners when serious incursions required intervention. But perhaps most importantly, she was learning. Each successful protection was teaching her more about the nature of the entities she now fought against, making her increasingly effective at preventing the kind of corruption that had nearly consumed her. Marcus called me regularly with updates on Emma's adjustment to her mother's transformation. It was difficult, as expected, but Emma was handling it with the remarkable resilience that children often display when adults are honest with them about difficult truths. She says she can feel Mommy watching over her, Marcus told me during one of our evening calls. Last night she was having a nightmare, and she woke up saying that Mommy had chased the scary shadows away. Madison is probably focusing much of her protective energy on Emma, at least initially. It's natural. She's still learning to expand her awareness beyond her immediate family. Is that healthy for Emma? Having her transformed mother so focused on protecting her? It's temporary. As Madison becomes more comfortable with her expanded consciousness, she'll learn to distribute her attention more broadly. But for now, Emma is probably the safest child in Connecticut from any form of supernatural threat. Indeed, my scrying showed Emma surrounded by an almost visible aura of protection. Any spiritual entity that might normally be attracted to a child's natural psychic openness was being actively repelled by Madison's guardian presence. But the effects weren't limited to Emma or even to our immediate region. Other practitioners across New England were reporting similar phenomena, protective spirits appearing to assist with supernatural threats, guidance being provided during dangerous workings, even direct intervention when human practitioners were overwhelmed by entities beyond their capability to handle. Charlotte called me with the most significant development. Ilara, something unprecedented is happening. The guardian spirits from previous binding rituals, ones that were performed decades or even centuries ago, they're all becoming more active. It's as if Madison's transformation has awakened a dormant network of protective consciousness. What do you mean, more active? I mean they're coordinating their efforts in ways they never have before. Yesterday, I was dealing with a possession case that was beyond my abilities, and suddenly I had guidance from what felt like multiple spiritual presences, all working together to contain the entity and protect the victim. This was unexpected but not unwelcome. If the binding ritual that had transformed Madison was somehow reactivating an ancient network of guardian spirits, it could provide a level of supernatural protection that our region hadn't enjoyed for centuries. Have you been able to communicate with any of them directly? That's the really interesting part. I tried reaching out during my evening meditations, and I got a response from someone who identified herself as Patricia Henderson, the woman from your grandmother's diary. She's been watching over this region for over 30 years, but Madison's arrival has given her access to new capabilities. Patricia Henderson, the last person to undergo the binding ritual before Madison, transformed into a guardian spirit in 1987 after being corrupted by entities similar to those that had infected Madison. What did Patricia tell you? That Madison is special. Most people who undergo the binding retain their individual consciousness, but become focused on specific types of threats. But Madison is developing what Patricia called network awareness, the ability to coordinate with other guardian spirits and share information across the entire protective grid. Why would Madison be different? Patricia thinks it's because Madison's corruption was so advanced before the binding. She had to fight against multiple entity types and learn to resist various forms of supernatural influence. That experience is translating into unusual versatility as a guardian spirit. As the weeks passed, the evidence of this expanding protective network became impossible to ignore. Reports of supernatural incidents across New England dropped by over 60%. Children who might normally be vulnerable to spiritual attachment were being protected by unseen forces. Even adults dealing with minor supernatural harassment found that their problems resolved themselves quickly and without intervention from human practitioners. I was documenting these changes when Marcus arrived with Emma for one of their regular weekend visits. Emma had asked to see my library, and I was happy to share age-appropriate books about spiritual awareness with a child who was clearly developing significant psychic sensitivity. Grandma Ilara, Emma said as we sat in my study surrounded by centuries-old grimoires and protective artifacts, sometimes I hear Mommy talking to other people, but they're not people like us. What do you mean, sweetheart? They're like Mommy now. People who chose to become protectors. She's teaching them things about the bad things that try to hurt children. From the mouths of babes. Emma was apparently sensitive enough to perceive the communications between guardian spirits, something that even experienced practitioners rarely achieved. What kind of things is Mommy teaching them? How to recognize when someone is being mean because of the shadow whispers. How to help people remember how to be nice again. How to protect whole families instead of just one person. This was remarkable. Madison wasn't just functioning as a guardian spirit. She was apparently serving as a teacher and coordinator for other protective entities, sharing the knowledge she'd gained from her experience with advanced spiritual corruption. Emma, I said carefully, can you ask Mommy if she'd like to talk to Grandma Ilara? I'd like to understand more about the work she's doing. Emma nodded and closed her eyes, her face taking on the concentration of someone engaging in serious spiritual communication. After a few moments, the temperature in the room dropped slightly, and I felt the familiar presence that indicated Madison's consciousness, focusing on our location. Hello, Ilara. Madison's voice seemed to come from the air around us, warm and recognizably hers despite the supernatural medium. "Hello, Madison. How are you adjusting to your new existence?" "Better than I expected. The work is fulfilling in ways I never experienced as a human. Every day I help prevent someone from going through what I went through. Every child I protect is a victory against the forces that tried to consume me." "Charlotte tells me you're working with other guardian spirits now."
Yes.
"There's an entire network of us, but until my transformation, we weren't able to coordinate effectively. My experience with multiple types of corruption has given me a kind of translation ability. I can understand threats that other guardians recognize, but can't fully comprehend." "And you're teaching them?" "Teaching and learning. Patricia Henderson has shown me protective techniques that were developed decades ago. Others have shared knowledge about entity types I never encountered. Together, we're becoming more effective than any of us could be individually." Marcus had been listening to this conversation with an expression of wonder and sadness. "Madison, I miss you. Emma misses you. Is there any way?" "Marcus, I'm not gone. I'm different, but I'm still here. I'm still watching over Emma, still caring about your happiness. But you need to build a life that doesn't depend on my physical presence. Emma needs a father who can be whole and happy, not someone who's mourning a loss that was actually a transformation." "I'm trying, but it's hard to explain to people why my wife disappeared. Hard to move forward when I know you're still present." "Tell them I died," Madison said gently. "From their perspective, that's essentially true. The woman you married is gone, replaced by something that serves a larger purpose. Grieve for her, remember the good times, but don't wait for her to come back." It was sage advice, and I could see Marcus beginning to accept the reality of his situation. His wife had made the ultimate sacrifice, giving up her humanity to protect others from the spiritual corruption that had nearly destroyed her. "Madison," I said, "is there anything you need from us? Anything that would help with your protective work?" "Actually, yes. I'd like Emma to learn more about spiritual awareness. Not because I want her to become a practitioner necessarily, but because children with her level of sensitivity need education to protect themselves." "I'd be happy to work with Emma on that. And Alara, thank you for giving me the choice to become something better instead of just destroying what I'd become. The binding ritual didn't just save me, it gave my existence meaning that it never had as a human." As Madison's presence faded and the room returned to normal temperature, I reflected on the unexpected turn this situation had taken. What had begun as a curse seeking justice for deliberate humiliation had become the catalyst for strengthening supernatural protections across an entire region. Madison's cruelty had awakened forces that demanded accountability. Her eventual choice to transform that cruelty into protection had created something unprecedented, a guardian spirit with the knowledge and ability to coordinate defensive efforts against threats that had been growing stronger and more organized. The mother's curse was complete, but its legacy would protect children for generations to come. "Grandma Alara," Emma said as we prepared to go back downstairs, "will you teach me how to help Mommy with her protecting work?" "I think that's exactly what we should do, sweetheart. After all, someone needs to learn how to carry on the family traditions." As I began planning Emma's education in the protective arts, I realized that Madison's transformation had accomplished something I never expected. It had ensured that the Blackthorn family's mission of spiritual protection would continue into the next generation, guided by a guardian spirit who understood better than anyone the consequences of choosing cruelty over kindness. The curse had ended, but the blessing it had created was just beginning. 6 months after Madison's transformation, the supernatural landscape of New England had fundamentally changed. What had begun as a single guardian spirit protecting one region had evolved into a coordinated network of protective entities working together with unprecedented effectiveness. Charlotte arrived at my house one crisp April morning with news that confirmed what I'd been sensing through my own spiritual awareness. Alara, I've been in communication with practitioners from Vermont to Rhode Island, and everyone is reporting the same thing. Supernatural incidents are down by nearly 80% across the region. More importantly, the incidents that are occurring are being resolved quickly and cleanly, often before human practitioners even become aware of them. Madison's network? It has to be. Yesterday, I was consulted about a possession case in Hartford that seemed beyond the local practitioner's abilities. By the time I arrived to help, the entity had already been banished, and the victim was recovering. The local practitioner said she'd felt guided through the entire process by what she described as friendly spirits with extensive knowledge of entity behavior. I nodded, having observed similar phenomena through the scrying mirror. Madison's consciousness had become something like a spiritual coordinator, identifying threats across the region and dispatching appropriate guardian spirits to address them. But perhaps more importantly, she was teaching the network to work proactively rather than reactively. Instead of waiting for supernatural problems to manifest and then responding, the guardian spirits were identifying potential threats and intervening before they could cause harm. There's something else, Charlotte continued. I've been getting inquiries from practitioners in other states. Word is spreading about what's happening here, and people want to know if similar protective networks could be established in their regions. This was both encouraging and concerning. The binding ritual that had created Madison's guardian consciousness was incredibly dangerous and could only be performed under very specific circumstances. It required someone who had been corrupted by supernatural entities, but retained enough humanity to choose transformation over destruction. The binding ritual can't be performed casually, I warned. It requires someone who has personal experience with advanced spiritual corruption but is still capable of genuine selflessness. Those conditions don't arise often. I understand that. But, Alara, what if we didn't need the binding ritual to create new guardian spirits? What if we could establish communication networks that allowed existing guardian spirits to extend their protection to other regions? It was an intriguing possibility. The guardian spirits created by past binding rituals were anchored to specific geographical areas, but there was no inherent reason they couldn't coordinate with protective entities from other regions. You're talking about creating a continental supernatural defense network.
Exactly.
With Madison serving as a central coordinator, sharing intelligence about entity types and protective techniques across vast distances. The idea was ambitious, but not impossible. Through the scrying mirror, I could already see evidence that Madison's consciousness was expanding beyond our immediate region. She was detecting spiritual disturbances hundreds of miles away and providing guidance to practitioners who had no idea they were receiving supernatural assistance. That evening, I asked Emma to help me communicate with Madison about Charlotte's proposal. Emma had become remarkably skilled at facilitating conversations with her transformed mother, perhaps because their emotional connection remained strong despite Madison's changed state. "Mommy," Emma said during one of their regular spiritual conversations, "Grandma Alara wants to ask you about helping protect children in other places, not just here." Madison's presence filled the room with familiar warmth, and her voice carried excitement when she responded. "I've been hoping someone would ask about that. Alara, I can sense spiritual disturbances across most of the eastern United States now, but I can only directly intervene within a few hundred miles of my anchor point. However, I've been in communication with guardian spirits from other regions, and we've been sharing information." "What kind of information?" "Entity identification, protective techniques, early warning systems for major incursions. There's a guardian spirit in Virginia who specializes in agricultural protections. She's been teaching us how to recognize supernatural threats to food supplies. Another one in Maine has developed techniques for protecting maritime communities from sea-based entities." "Could you coordinate a formal network?" "I think so. But, Alara, It would require more than just communication between guardian spirits. We'd need human practitioners in each region who could serve as anchors for our expanded consciousness, and we'd need some way to share knowledge across vast distances. Charlotte, who had been listening intently, leaned forward with obvious interest. What if we established a foundation? Something that could facilitate communication between practitioners while providing cover for the supernatural coordination happening behind the scenes. A foundation? Educational programs, research grants, conferences where practitioners could meet and share knowledge. On the surface, it would look like academic study of folklore and regional traditions. But actually, it would be facilitating the expansion of supernatural protective networks. The idea had merit. A foundation could provide legitimate reasons for practitioners to travel, communicate, and coordinate their activities without drawing unwanted attention to the reality of what they were protecting against. Madison, what do you think? Could a foundation like that support the kind of network expansion you're envisioning? Yes, but with one important addition. We need people like Emma, children and young adults with natural spiritual sensitivity who could be trained to facilitate communication with guardian spirits. The current network is limited by how few human practitioners can clearly perceive our communications. Emma perked up at this suggestion. I could teach other kids how to talk to the protector spirits. It's not hard once you know how to listen properly. That's exactly what we need, Madison agreed. Children often have clearer spiritual perception than adults, and they're more accepting of the reality of supernatural protection. If we could train a generation of young people to serve as communication facilitators, we'd have a sustainable infrastructure for expanding protective networks across the entire continent, I finished. Over the following weeks, we developed the framework for what would become the Blackthorn Foundation for Spiritual Heritage. Officially, it would promote the study and preservation of regional folklore and traditional knowledge. Unofficially, it would coordinate the expansion of supernatural protective networks across North America. Charlotte agreed to serve as executive director, using her legal expertise to establish the foundation structure and secure nonprofit status. I would provide historical knowledge and access to my family's accumulated resources. Emma would lead the youth education program, teaching other sensitive children how to communicate with guardian spirits. But perhaps most importantly, Madison would serve as the network coordinator, using her unique abilities to facilitate communication between guardian spirits across vast distances and coordinate responses to supernatural threats that crossed regional boundaries. There's one more thing we should consider, Madison said during one of our planning sessions. As the network expands, we're going to attract attention from entities that don't want humans to have this level of supernatural protection. We need to prepare for organized opposition. What kind of opposition? The same entities that tried to corrupt me are part of larger hierarchies that view human spiritual development as a threat to their food sources. As we become more effective at protecting people, they're going to work harder to undermine our efforts. It was a sobering reminder that expanding our protective capabilities would also make us targets for forces that profited from human spiritual vulnerability. How do we prepare for that? By making the network resilient rather than dependent on any single point of failure. If one region's protective grid is compromised, others can provide backup. If specific guardian spirits are targeted for attack, the network can redistribute their responsibilities. And if they target the human practitioners? Then we make sure every practitioner in the network has access to serious protective resources and emergency support. No one fights these battles alone anymore. As we finalized plans for the Foundation's launch, I reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought us to this point. Madison's Thanksgiving cruelty had awakened a curse that could have destroyed her completely. Instead, her eventual choice to transform that cruelty into protection had become the catalyst for the most significant expansion of supernatural defensive capabilities in centuries. The mother's curse had achieved its original purpose. justice for deliberate humiliation. But its ultimate legacy would be a continental network of spiritual protection that would safeguard millions of people from threats they would never even know existed. Sometimes the most powerful magic was the kind that transformed personal pain into protection for others. Madison had learned that lesson the hard way, but her transformation was now creating opportunities for others to learn it through education rather than corruption. The curse was complete, but the protection it had awakened would continue expanding for generations to come. By the following Thanksgiving, exactly 1 year after the humiliation that had started everything, the Blackthorn Foundation for Spiritual Heritage had grown beyond our most optimistic projections. We'd established contact with practitioners in 47 states, facilitated communication with guardian spirits from 16 different regions, and trained over 200 young people in spiritual awareness and protection techniques. But perhaps most remarkably, we documented a 73% reduction in serious supernatural incidents across the areas where our network was active. I was reviewing our annual report when Emma burst into my study with the breathless excitement of a 9-year-old who had just discovered something amazing. "Grandma Alara, I just talked to Mommy, and she says there's something really important happening tonight." "What kind of important?" "She says the shadow people who try to hurt her are trying to organize a big attack, but she and the other protector spirits are ready for them." Through the scrying mirror, I could indeed sense unusual spiritual activity across the region. Dark entities that normally operated independently were gathering in unprecedented numbers, apparently coordinating some kind of major offensive against our protective network. I called Charlotte immediately. "Are you sensing the disturbance?" "Hard to miss it. Whatever's happening, it's bigger than anything we've dealt with since the network was established. I've got reports coming in from practitioners across New England about unusual entity activity." Madison warned Emma that this might be some kind of organized attack. That would make sense. We've been so successful at preventing individual incidents that the entities are probably trying a coordinated approach to overwhelm our defenses. That evening, as the spiritual disturbance reached its peak, I gathered with Emma in my basement ritual space to monitor the supernatural battle that was unfolding across multiple dimensions of reality. Through the scrying mirror, I could observe Madison and dozens of other guardian spirits working together with military precision. They had anticipated this attack and prepared for it by prepositioning defensive resources and establishing communication networks that allowed for real-time coordination. "Look, Grandma." Emma pointed at the mirror surface, where patterns of light were moving in complex formations. "Mommy's showing the other protector spirits how to work together like a team instead of just by themselves." Indeed, Madison appeared to be serving as a field commander, directing guardian spirits to optimal positions and coordinating their defensive efforts. The attacking entities, despite their superior numbers, were being systematically outmaneuvered by defensive forces that could communicate and adapt faster than they could. But the most impressive aspect of the defense wasn't the tactical coordination. It was the way Madison had prepared for this possibility by establishing backup systems and redundant protections. When one group of entities tried to break through the protective grid in Vermont, guardian spirits from 3 other states immediately reinforced that location. When another attack targeted the communication networks in Virginia, alternative channels activated automatically to maintain coordination. "Your mother has become quite the strategist," I told Emma as we watched the battle unfold. "She says she learned from the bad things that tried to hurt her. She knows how they think and what they're trying to do, so she can always be one step ahead of them." The attack continued for several hours, with entities probing for weaknesses in our defensive network and guardian spirits adapting their responses in real time. But gradually, it became clear that the attackers had underestimated both the strength of our defenses and the level of coordination Madison had achieved between different guardian spirits. By dawn, the attacking entities had retreated, having failed to establish any permanent breaches in our protective network. More importantly, The defensive effort had demonstrated that our system could handle threats far larger than anything individual practitioners could manage alone. Charlotte called as the sun was rising, her voice filled with exhausted triumph. Alara, I've been getting reports from across the network. Not only did we successfully repel the attack, but several regions reported that their protective capabilities are now stronger than before. It's as if the defensive effort somehow enhanced the Guardian Spirit's abilities. How is that possible? Madison thinks it's because this was the first time all the regional Guardian Spirits worked together as a unified network. The collaboration created synergies that enhanced everyone's individual capabilities. It was a remarkable development. Instead of weakening our defenses, the coordinated attack had actually strengthened them by forcing the Guardian Spirits to develop new levels of cooperation and mutual support. But perhaps most importantly, the successful defense had proven that our network could handle threats at a scale that justified expanding our efforts internationally. Over the following months, we began receiving inquiries from practitioners in Europe, Asia, and Australia. The supernatural threats we were dealing with weren't limited to North America, and news of our success had spread through the global community of people who understood the reality of spiritual warfare. The entities are becoming more organized worldwide, Madison explained during one of our evening communications. What we're dealing with here is part of a larger pattern. They're testing human defensive capabilities in multiple regions, looking for weaknesses they can exploit. Are you suggesting we need a global protective network? I'm suggesting that the alternative is allowing them to succeed in regions where humans don't have adequate spiritual defenses, then using those regions as staging areas for attacks on protected areas. It was a sobering analysis, but one that aligned with reports we were receiving from international practitioners. Supernatural incidents were increasing in areas without established protective networks, while decreasing in regions where guardian spirits were active. What would global expansion require? More people like Emma, young practitioners with natural communication abilities who could facilitate contact with guardian spirits from different cultural traditions. And we'd need to adapt our techniques to work with protective entities that developed in different spiritual environments. Emma, who had been listening to this conversation with the serious attention she always gave to discussions about her mother's work, suddenly spoke up. Mommy, I had a dream last night about meeting protector spirits from other countries. They looked different from you and the ones here, but they were doing the same kind of protecting work. What did they look like, sweetheart? Some looked like people, but some looked like animals or even like living light. But they all felt the same, like they cared about keeping children safe from scary things. Madison's presence seemed to intensify with excitement. Emma, that wasn't a dream. That was spiritual communication across vast distances. The guardian spirits from other regions have been trying to establish contact with you because they know you can facilitate the kind of coordination they need. Really? Really? And if you're willing to help, we could begin establishing protective networks that span the entire planet. I felt a mixture of pride and concern as I watched my granddaughter accept this enormous responsibility with the casual confidence that only children possess. She was 8 years old and being asked to help coordinate supernatural defenses across multiple continents. But then I remembered that Madison had been much older when she'd been forced to learn these lessons through corruption and near destruction. Emma was learning them through love and protection, with the guidance of a mother who had already walked the darkest paths and chosen light. Are you sure you want to take on something this big, sweetheart? I asked. Emma nodded solemnly. If Mommy can protect children from the shadow people, and if I can help her protect even more children, then that's what I want to do. As we began planning for global expansion of our protective network, I reflected on the incredible journey that had brought us to this point. 1 year ago, Madison had been a cruel woman who took pleasure in humiliating others. Her actions had awakened a curse that could have destroyed her completely. Instead, Her eventual choice to transform that cruelty into protection had become the foundation for what might become the first global network of coordinated supernatural defense. The mother's curse had achieved perfect justice, not through punishment or revenge, but through transformation that turned personal darkness into protection for millions of innocent people. And at the center of it all was Emma, a child who would grow up knowing that some of the most important work in the world involved protecting others from threats they would never see coming. The curse was complete, but the protection it had awakened was just beginning to reach its full potential. 18 months after Madison's transformation, Emma had become something unprecedented in the supernatural protection community. A 9-year-old spiritual diplomat capable of facilitating communication between guardian spirits from completely different cultural and magical traditions. I watched with amazement as she conducted what she called protector meetings, sessions where guardian spirits from around the world shared information about entity types, protective techniques, and emerging threats. Her natural empathy and lack of cultural prejudices made her uniquely suited for bridging differences between spiritual entities that had developed in isolation from each other. The mountain spirits from Tibet are really good at protecting people from entities that hide in high places, Emma explained to me after one of her international communication sessions. But they're having trouble with new kinds of shadow people that don't follow the old rules. What kind of new shadow people? Ones that can use computers and phones to hurt people from far away. The mountain spirits don't understand technology, so they can't protect against digital attacks. This was a concerning development. Spiritual entities were apparently adapting to modern technology, finding ways to use digital networks to bypass traditional protective methods. What did you tell them? I asked Mommy to teach them what she learned about technology spirits when our house was acting weird. And I told them about the protector spirits in Silicon Valley who specialize in keeping computers safe from shadow people. Through Emma's facilitation, we were discovering that the supernatural threat landscape had evolved far beyond traditional haunting and possession. Entities were learning to manipulate digital systems, using social media to spread emotional contagion, and even finding ways to corrupt artificial intelligence systems. But perhaps more importantly, we were also discovering that protective spirits from different traditions had developed complementary capabilities that became incredibly powerful when combined. Charlotte called me with news that demonstrated the practical impact of this global coordination. Ilara, you need to hear what happened in Singapore last week. A major technological corporation was dealing with what appeared to be a systematic cyber attack that was causing psychological effects in employees, depression, anxiety, aggressive behavior. Local practitioners couldn't identify the source. Supernatural cyber attack.
Exactly.
But here's the remarkable part. Within hours of the Singapore practitioners reaching out for help, they had guidance from Madison's network, technical expertise from Silicon Valley digital protection spirits, and containment techniques from guardian spirits in Seoul who had dealt with similar incidents. And the result? The attack was contained within 18 hours, the affected employees recovered completely, and the entity responsible was banished to whatever digital realm it came from. More importantly, the protective measures put in place will prevent similar attacks throughout that entire corporate network. This kind of rapid, coordinated response to emerging supernatural threats was exactly what Madison had envisioned when she'd first proposed expanding the protective network beyond our regional boundaries. But the success was also attracting increasingly sophisticated opposition. Emma, I said during one of our evening conversations, has your mother mentioned anything about the shadow people organizing differently lately? Emma nodded seriously. She says they're copying how she and the other protector spirits work together. They're trying to make teams too, but they're not very good at it because they don't actually care about each other. What do you mean? The protector spirits work together because they all want to help people. But the shadow people only work together when they think it will help them get what they want for themselves. So they can't really trust each other. It was a profound observation from someone who was still losing teeth. The fundamental difference between entities that served others and entities that served only themselves created structural weaknesses in any attempts at malevolent organization. Madison's presence filled the room as she joined our conversation. Emma's right about their organizational limitations, but we shouldn't underestimate their capacity for causing harm. They're learning to exploit the very technologies that connect our world, and they're becoming more sophisticated in their approach. What kind of sophistication? They're studying our network, learning our communication patterns, trying to develop countermeasures. More concerning, they're attempting to corrupt guardian spirits by offering them power in exchange for abandoning their protective duties. This was a new and troubling development. Guardian spirits were supposed to be immune to corruption because they had already chosen transformation over destruction. But apparently, the entities opposing us were finding ways to tempt even transformed consciousness. Have any guardian spirits accepted these offers? Not yet, but there have been temptations. Entities offering guardian spirits the ability to return to physical form, to reunite with loved ones, to have the human experiences they gave up when they chose transformation. I felt a chill. If guardian spirits could be corrupted or convinced to abandon their duties, the entire protective network could collapse. How do we protect against that kind of temptation? By making sure guardian spirits understand that their work has meaning beyond just preventing supernatural attacks. By showing them the lives they're saving, the children they're protecting, the families that remain whole because of their sacrifice. Emma brightened with an idea. What if we made a special day for thanking the protector spirits, like Thanksgiving, but for saying thank you to all the guardians who keep us safe? It was a simple but brilliant suggestion. Many guardian spirits had been isolated for decades, protecting people who never knew they existed and receiving no acknowledgement for their sacrifices. A formal recognition ceremony could strengthen their resolve and remind them why they'd chosen transformation. That's a wonderful idea, sweetheart. We could coordinate it across the entire network, so guardian spirits everywhere would know their work is appreciated. Over the following months, we developed what became known as Guardian Day, an annual recognition ceremony held simultaneously across every region where our protective network was active. During these ceremonies, practitioners and sensitive individuals like Emma would communicate directly with guardian spirits, expressing gratitude for their protection and sharing stories of the lives they'd helped save. The first Guardian Day was more successful than we'd dare hope. Not only did it strengthen the resolve of existing guardian spirits, but it also attracted new protective entities who had been working in isolation and wanted to join a coordinated network where their efforts would be appreciated. More importantly, it seemed to create a spiritual resonance that enhanced the entire network's capabilities. Guardian spirits reported increased sensitivity to threats, improved ability to coordinate across distances, and stronger connections to the human communities they protected. But perhaps the most significant development came from an unexpected source. During the Guardian Day ceremony in our region, Emma suddenly announced that she was receiving communication from someone new, someone who identified herself as my grandmother, Rebecca Blackthorne, who had died when I was Emma's age. Great-great-grandma Rebecca says she's been watching our family's work for a long time, Emma reported, her voice taking on the formal tone she used when delivering important spiritual communications. She says that what Mommy did, choosing to become a protector instead of letting the curse destroy her, completed something that our family has been working toward for 7 generations. What do you mean, completed something? She says our family was always meant to help create a network of protection that could guard the whole world from shadow people. But it could only happen when someone from our bloodline proved that even the worst corruption could be transformed into protection. This revelation recontextualized everything I thought I understood about my family's history. The Blackthorne women hadn't just been regional practitioners protecting a small area of Connecticut. We'd been part of a multi-generational plan to establish global supernatural defenses. Great-great-grandma Rebecca wants to talk to you directly, Emma said. She says there are things about our family's real mission that you need to understand. I felt my grandmother's presence for the first time in over 50 years, warm and familiar despite the decades that had passed. Hello, Ilara. Rebecca's voice whispered through the spiritual connection Emma was maintaining. I'm so proud of what you've accomplished with Madison's transformation. Grandmother, Emma says our family has been working towards something like this for generations. Is that true? It's true. Every Blackthorn woman has added to the foundation that made Madison's transformation possible. Your great-great-grandmother established the original protective bindings. Your great-grandmother developed the techniques for guardian spirit communication. Your mother refined the transformation rituals. And you had the wisdom to offer redemption instead of just punishment when Madison's corruption awakened the ancient powers. But why didn't anyone tell me this was the ultimate goal? Because each generation had to choose to serve protection over personal power. If you'd known the larger plan, you might have made different choices based on obligation rather than genuine compassion. Madison's transformation only worked because you offered it from love, not from duty to some ancestral mission. It was humbling to realize that my response to Madison's cruelty had been the culmination of centuries of preparation by women I'd never met, but whose work had shaped every decision I'd made. What happens now? I asked. The network is established, it's growing stronger, and it's protecting people worldwide. Is our family's mission complete? The foundation is complete, Rebecca replied. But the work is just beginning. The entities you're fighting against are ancient and patient. They'll adapt to your current defenses and develop new forms of attack. The protective network will need to evolve constantly to stay ahead of them. And Emma's role in all this? Emma represents the next phase, where you and Madison learn to transform corruption into protection. Emma is learning to prevent corruption from taking hold in the first place. She's developing abilities that could teach people to recognize and resist spiritual manipulation before it reaches dangerous levels. I looked at my granddaughter, who was listening to this conversation with the serious attention she gave to all discussions about her evolving spiritual responsibilities. Is that what you want, Emma? To spend your life teaching people how to protect themselves from the shadow people? Emma nodded without hesitation. If I can help keep other kids safe like Mommy is keeping me safe, then that's what I want to do. Even though it means your life will be different from other children's? Grandma Ilara, other children don't get to talk to their mommies after they become protector spirits. Other children don't get to help guard the whole world from scary things. My life is already different, but it's different in good ways. As the ceremony concluded and the spiritual presences of both Madison and Rebecca faded back to their normal levels of awareness, I reflected on the remarkable journey our family had taken. 7 generations of Blackthorn women had worked toward this moment when global supernatural protection became possible. Madison's cruelty had threatened to end that lineage's work, but her ultimate choice to transform that cruelty into protection had instead brought it to fruition. Now Emma would carry the work forward, developing new capabilities that could prevent the kind of spiritual corruption that had nearly destroyed her mother. The mother's curse had achieved perfect justice, not through punishment, but through transformation that honored the sacrifice of every Blackthorn woman who had contributed to this moment. And in the basement of the house where it all began, the protective circle that had witnessed Madison's transformation continued to anchor a network that now spanned the globe, ensuring that children everywhere would grow up safer from supernatural threats than any previous generation in human history. The curse was complete, but the protection it had awakened would continue growing for as long as there were Blackthorn women willing to choose service over self-interest. 5 years after the Thanksgiving dinner that changed everything, I stood in my garden on a perfect autumn morning, watching Emma teach a group of young people from around the world how to communicate with guardian spirits. At 14, she had become the most gifted spiritual communicator of her generation, but more importantly, she had retained the compassion and wisdom that made her an effective teacher. Remember, she was saying to a girl about her own age who had traveled from Japan for this training, the protector spirits aren't scary, even though they're very powerful. They chose to give up being human so they could keep children like us safe. When you talk to them, you're talking to someone who loves you even though they've never met you. The Blackthorn Foundation had grown far beyond our original vision. We now had offices on 6 continents, had trained over 10,000 young people in spiritual awareness and protection, and coordinated with guardian spirits in nearly every country on Earth. But perhaps most remarkably, we had documented a global reduction in serious supernatural incidents of over 80% in regions where our network was active. Marcus approached through the garden, carrying a tray of refreshments for Emma's students. In the years since Madison's transformation, he had become a different person, more confident, more purposeful, dedicated to supporting his daughter's extraordinary mission while building a meaningful life of his own. "How's the international workshop going?" he asked. "Emma's explaining the difference between guardian spirits and other types of protective entities," I replied. "She's remarkably good at making complex spiritual concepts accessible to young people. She gets that from you. And from Madison, I think. The ability to teach difficult truths with kindness." We watched as Emma helped a boy from Brazil establish his first clear communication with a local guardian spirit. The joy on his face when the connection solidified was exactly why we did this work. Every child who learned these skills became someone who could help protect their community from supernatural threats. "Margaret," Emma called to me, using the formal address she employed when acting in her official capacity as network coordinator. "Could you join us for a moment? The students have some questions about family lineages and inherited abilities." I moved closer to the group of young people who represented the future of global supernatural protection. They came from different countries, different cultures, different spiritual traditions, but they all shared the same gift of clear spiritual perception and the same dedication to protecting others. "Mrs. Blackthorn," asked a girl from Sweden, "Emma told us that your family has been doing this work for hundreds of years. How did you know that you were supposed to become a protector?" It was a question I'd been asked many times, and the answer had evolved as my understanding of our mission had deepened. "I didn't know," I said honestly. "For most of my life, I thought I was just someone who happened to have unusual abilities. It wasn't until my daughter-in-law's cruelty awakened the family curse that I understood our larger purpose." "But you must have had some idea that you were different," pressed a boy from Nigeria. "How did your family prepare you for this work?" "They taught me to see beyond surface appearances, to recognize spiritual disturbances, and to understand that some responsibilities are inherited rather than chosen. But most importantly, they taught me that power should always be used to protect others, never just to benefit yourself." Emma stepped forward to address the deeper question that the students were really asking. What they want to know is whether they'll be able to do this work even if they don't come from families like ours. "And the answer," I said, looking around the circle of earnest young faces, "is that the most important qualification for this work isn't inherited ability. It's the choice to care more about protecting others than about your own comfort or safety. Some of you may have family traditions that prepared you for this mission. Others may be the first in your families to develop these abilities. But all of you are here because you've already made the choice to serve something larger than yourselves." "Like Madison did," said the girl from Japan. "Emma told us that her mother was corrupted by shadow entities but chose to become a protector instead of letting them destroy her." "Exactly like Madison did. She proved that it's never too late to choose redemption over destruction, transformation over corruption. And her choice created the foundation that makes all of our current work possible." As the afternoon workshop continued, I reflected on the remarkable transformation our family and our mission had undergone. 5 years ago, I had been an isolated practitioner using inherited abilities to protect a small region of Connecticut. Madison had been a cruel woman who took pleasure in humiliating others. Emma had been an innocent child caught between adult conflicts she couldn't understand. Now I was part of a global network protecting millions of people from supernatural threats. Madison had become a guardian spirit whose work prevented spiritual corruption worldwide. And Emma was developing into a leader who could coordinate supernatural defenses across cultural and linguistic barriers. The mother's curse had achieved its purpose through complete transformation of everyone it touched. That evening, as the international students settled into their accommodations and prepared for another day of intensive training, Madison's presence filled my study with familiar warmth. "How do you think the workshop is going?" I asked. "Better than I dared hope," Madison replied, her voice carrying satisfaction and pride. "These young people represent something unprecedented. The first generation to grow up with systematic education about spiritual protection. They'll be able to prevent the kind of corruption that nearly destroyed me because they'll recognize the early warning signs and know how to resist spiritual manipulation." And Emma's development? She's becoming everything I hoped she could be. Not just a gifted communicator, but a true leader who can inspire others to choose protection over power, service over self-interest. Do you miss it? Your human life, the physical relationship with Emma and Marcus? Madison was quiet for a moment before responding. "I miss the simplicity of it sometimes. The way Emma used to climb into my lap when she was little, the feeling of Marcus's arms around me at night, even the mundane pleasures of eating food or feeling sunlight on my skin. But I wouldn't trade what I've become for what I was. As a human, I protected at most a few people, my family, perhaps some friends. As a guardian spirit, I help protect millions of people every day. I've prevented countless children from experiencing the kind of spiritual corruption that almost consumed me. The work I do now has meaning that my human life never achieved." And you're content with that trade-off. More than content. Fulfilled in ways I never experienced as a human. Every child I protect, every family I help keep safe, every practitioner I guide through a dangerous situation, all of it validates the choice I made to transform my corruption into protection. As Madison's presence faded back to its normal background level, I opened the family grimoire to record the day's developments. Each generation of Blackthorn women had contributed to this record, documenting their experiences and insights for the daughters who would follow. My entry for this day would note the successful expansion of our training program to include students from 12 different countries, the establishment of communication protocols with guardian spirits from 4 previously uncontacted regions, and Emma's continued development as a spiritual diplomat capable of bridging differences between protective entities from completely different traditions. But perhaps most importantly, I would record that the original purpose of the mother's curse, achieving justice for deliberate cruelty, had been fulfilled through transformation rather than punishment. Madison's choice to become something that protected others had created ripple effects that would continue protecting people for generations to come. As I closed the grimoire and prepared for bed, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing your life's work will continue long after you're gone. Emma would carry the mission forward, training new generations of protectors and coordinating with guardian spirits across the globe. The network Madison's transformation had made possible would continue growing, adapting to new threats and developing new capabilities. Children would grow up safer from supernatural predation than any previous generation in human history. And somewhere in the spaces between worlds, Madison would continue her work as a guardian spirit, proving every day that the worst corruption could be transformed into the most powerful protection. The mother's curse was complete, but the mother's love, transformed into service to others, would be eternal. The documentary crew had been following Emma for 6 months, documenting her work with what they believed was an innovative approach to community mental health and family counseling. They had no idea they were actually filming the coordination of global supernatural defenses. I watched from my garden as Emma, now 19 and a sophomore at Yale studying comparative religion and psychology, conducted what appeared to be a therapy session with a troubled teenager. In reality, she was helping the boy recognize and resist the early stages of spiritual manipulation that could have led to serious corruption. The important thing to remember, Tyler, Emma was saying, is that the angry thoughts you've been having aren't really coming from you. They're being amplified by external influences that want you to hurt the people you care about. But they feel like my thoughts, Tyler protested. How can I tell the difference? Because your real thoughts include love for your family, even when you're frustrated with them. These other thoughts only focus on anger and revenge. They're trying to make you forget that you actually care about your little sister. Through methods that appeared entirely psychological to outside observers, Emma was teaching Tyler to identify and reject spiritual influences that had been encouraging him toward increasingly antisocial behavior. The techniques she used were grounded in solid therapeutic practice, but they were enhanced by her ability to perceive the supernatural entities that were targeting vulnerable young people. The documentary would eventually be titled Healing Families, a new approach to adolescent behavioral issues, and would win several awards for its portrayal of innovative therapeutic techniques. The producers would never know they had documented the most sophisticated spiritual defense network in human history. Marcus approached through the garden, now 45 and serving as the Foundation's Director of Operations. He had never remarried, though he'd had several meaningful relationships over the years. He seemed content with his role as Emma's father and supporter of the mission that had grown from his wife's transformation. "How's the filming going?" I asked. Emma's being very careful to keep the conversation focused on psychological techniques. The producers are fascinated by her success rate with difficult cases, but they're attributing it to her natural empathy and innovative training methods. Which is partially true.
Exactly.
The spiritual awareness just enhances her natural abilities as a counselor and teacher. We stood together watching Emma work with Tyler, seeing both levels of what was happening. The therapeutic intervention that was healing a troubled family and the spiritual protection that was preventing a young person from being corrupted by entities that fed on adolescent anger and confusion. "Any word from Madison about the global situation?" I asked. "The network is stronger than ever. Supernatural incidents continue to decline worldwide, and the guardian spirits are reporting improved coordination and communication across all regions." Madison thinks we might be approaching what she calls sustainable spiritual stability, a level of protection that could be maintained indefinitely. It was remarkable progress. 10 years ago, spiritual protection had been the work of isolated practitioners using inherited knowledge to defend small geographical areas. Now it was a coordinated global effort involving thousands of trained individuals and hundreds of guardian spirits working together to protect humanity from supernatural threats. And Emma's future plans? She wants to complete her undergraduate degree, then pursue graduate work in both psychology and comparative religion. She's designing a research program that would study traditional healing practices, which would actually be systematic documentation of spiritual protection techniques from different cultures. Academic legitimacy for supernatural defense work. Exactly. By framing it as anthropological and psychological research, she could teach these techniques in university settings without triggering skepticism from people who aren't ready to accept the reality of spiritual warfare. As the documentary crew finished their filming and began packing their equipment, Emma joined us in the garden, looking tired but satisfied. "How did it go?" I asked. "Tyler's going to be fine. The entities that were influencing him were fairly weak, and once he learned to recognize their input, he was able to resist their suggestions. His family should see significant improvement in his behavior within a few weeks." And the documentary crew? They got everything they needed to make a compelling film about innovative therapeutic approaches. They'll help spread awareness of these techniques without realizing they're actually documenting spiritual protection work. It was exactly the kind of careful balance Emma had mastered, using conventional frameworks to teach supernatural concepts to people who weren't ready to accept the reality of spiritual warfare. "Sweetheart," I said, "there's something I want to give you." I handed her a wooden box that had belonged to my grandmother, containing the silver pendant that had been passed down through 7 generations of Blackthorn women. "I think it's time for you to officially become the family's primary practitioner." Emma accepted the pendant with the solemnity appropriate to such a moment. When she placed it around her neck, I could see her aura brighten as the accumulated power of our lineage acknowledged her as its new guardian. "I won't let the family tradition down," she said. "You couldn't if you tried. Everything you've accomplished, everything you're becoming, it's all proof that you understand what this power is really for." As we stood together in the garden where Madison had first taught Emma to recognize spiritual disturbances, I felt the presence of all the Blackthorn women who had contributed to this moment. Rebecca, who had established the original protective bindings. Margaret, who had developed guardian spirit communication techniques. Sarah, who had refined the transformation rituals. And Madison, who had proven that even the worst corruption could be transformed into protection. "Tell me about the original curse," Emma said. "The one that started all of this." "It was never really about punishment," I said. "It was about justice. Not just for the individual cruelty that triggered it, but for all the cruelty that corruption creates when it spreads unchecked. The curse demanded accountability, but it also offered redemption to anyone willing to choose transformation over destruction. And Madison chose transformation. She chose to become something that protects others instead of something that hurts them. That choice created the foundation for everything we've built since then." Emma nodded, understanding the weight of the legacy she was inheriting. "What happens now?" "Now you carry the work forward in whatever way your generation requires. The threats will evolve, the techniques will adapt, but the fundamental mission remains the same: protecting people from spiritual forces that would corrupt or destroy them. Will you help me?" "For as long as I'm able. But Emma, this is your mission now. Trust your instincts, learn from the guardian spirits, and remember that the most powerful protection always comes from choosing to serve others rather than yourself." As the sun set over the garden that had witnessed so many important moments in our family's history, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing the work will continue. Emma would face challenges I couldn't anticipate, develop capabilities I couldn't imagine, and expand the protective network in ways that would safeguard future generations from threats that hadn't yet manifested. The mother's curse had achieved perfect justice through transformation rather than destruction. Madison's choice to become a guardian spirit had created a global network of protection that would continue growing and strengthening for as long as there were people willing to choose service over self-interest. And in the spaces between worlds, Madison would continue her work, proving every day that love was stronger than hatred, protection more powerful than corruption, and redemption always possible for those brave enough to choose it. The curse was complete, but the love that had transformed it into blessing would be eternal. Thank you for joining Alara, Madison, and Emma on their extraordinary journey from humiliation and revenge to redemption and global protection. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt the power that comes from choosing transformation over destruction, remember this: some bloodlines carry more than just DNA. They carry the responsibility to protect others from forces that would corrupt human goodness. This tale reminds us that the most powerful revenge isn't about making others suffer. It's about transforming suffering into strength, corruption into wisdom, and personal pain into protection for others. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to us becomes the catalyst for the most important work we'll ever do. Madison's story shows us that redemption is always possible, even after the darkest corruption, but it requires the courage to sacrifice what we want for ourselves in service of protecting others. Her transformation from cruel antagonist to guardian spirit proves that love and service are stronger than hatred and selfishness. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss another story that might speak directly to your soul. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that they have more power than they know to choose light over darkness, especially when darkness seems to be winning. Until next time, keep walking your path with the knowledge that some curses are really blessings in disguise, that the most ancient magic is choosing to protect rather than destroy, and that transformation is always possible for those brave enough to choose it.